also cost you money and time. People who fail to keep about 3 feet apart and those meeting in groups of 10 or more risk a $7,000 fine or even jail time. Singapore has had at least 800 coronavirus cases and 3 deaths. We now want to get a personal perspective about conditions right now in Singapore. Margie Warrell is there. She is the author of 4 best-selling books whose husband is hospitalised with the virus. Margie, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, how is your husband?
He's doing okay. His fever has finished. He's over his fever now, but he's still extremely fatigued, still hospitalised and recovering.
So tell us about the timeline when he first fell ill and how you managed it.
Yeah, look, he actually arrived in from the United States on a Wednesday morning, I think it was the 17th, and the following morning was feeling, not too great. Wasn't sure if it was jet lag. I usually wouldn't suggest to check the temperature, but in this situation I said, why don't you? And it was a mild fever. It was 37.5 Celsius. So he laid low, and the next morning the fever was a bit higher, and we felt at that point that would be good for him to get tested. And I haven't seen him since then. That was Friday the 20th of March, and he has been hospitalised since then, and he had a pretty high fever for about a week before it abated, and he was really pretty wiped out for a guy that's very fit and strong. But I'm happy to say that he's feeling a little bit better and a little bit stronger every day. But of course, in Singapore, everybody remains in hospital until they are testing negative. No one is sent home, even if they have mild symptoms. It's one of Singapore's many protocols to help isolate people who are infectious and just ensure and to contain any more infections in the community.
Well, Margie, I mean, Singaporeans, they lived through SARS back in 2002, 2003, and obviously were hyper-vigilant when coronavirus appeared on the scene earlier this year. Authorities, as we just mentioned, have now announced even stricter measures. Do you believe that the world should be looking to Singapore on how to manage this pandemic?
Absolutely. I do believe Singapore is a gold standard for this. And I've had so many people. I mean, Singapore has 5.6 million people living here, 3.5 million are citizens, and then the rest are people like myself here for work reasons. And so many people have said to me, I couldn't think of anywhere better to be in the world, because Singapore, one, it was swift and decisive in its protocols straight away back in January, when most of the world was thinking that it wouldn't affect them. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has been very direct, very transparent, and very clear in all of his communications from the get-go. And I think that everyone in Singapore, while people are a bit anxious right now, and obviously the measures have been really ramped up a lot in the last week or two as it has really spread in other parts of the world, I think everyone in Singapore feels that they are really living in probably the best country in the world right now in terms of how this pandemic is being managed.
Well, I mean, 3 deaths. I mean, that's quite extraordinary. 800 infections. I mean, those figures in itself speak for itself. Margie, you mentioned your husband is recovering. He's still in hospital. When are you expecting him home?
Yeah, well, that's the $64 million question. He actually was transferred to another facility yesterday. So he was no longer considered to need, really high levels of medical care. And they've set up another, we're calling it a resort, an isolation resort. I'm not sure I'd want to go there on a holiday, but it is sort of a little bit like a hotel accommodation, sort of, where he's sharing a room with someone, and he will stay there until he's testing negative. Look, I've heard it might be days, but I've actually heard of some people continuing to test positive for the virus for weeks. We're certainly hoping, we're all hoping that's not the case. But as Dr. Anthony Fauci said in the United States, we don't set the timeline. This virus sets the timeline, and I think I just keep focusing on, I know he's in a good place, he's getting excellent care, and obviously his prognosis is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. That in itself is very reassuring. But we obviously hope that he gets home to you very soon. We wish you and him the very best. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Margie Warrell, joining us there from Singapore.